Hello everyone, and welcome back to another article reading where we go through my back catalog of articles that I have written in the past, and then go ahead and read through them, offer some commentary, and also talk a little bit about the game itself to see, if I still agree with what I thought about, whenever I wrote it, or things like that. Today we'll be doing an article that is actually a lot more recent. We ended up getting the article I did about Full Spectrum Warrior, which is basically like a strategy RPG for the Xbox. I actually streamed this game, and I actually really like this game a lot. I have the sequel as well, but I have not gotten a chance to play it yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and read the article here a little bit, and I might chime in here and there depending on how it goes. This is a more recent article, so I may not be as far removed from how I actually write that these days. So I might not have a ton of commentary on the actual writing itself, but maybe on the game itself and maybe the structure as well. So this article is titled Full Spectrum Warrior, a War Frozen in Time, and the article was published on August 29th, 2018. This is just to my own personal website, One Control Report. I was a bit nervous revisiting Full Spectrum Warrior. I actually played this when I was a kid. I was a bit nervous revisiting Full Spectrum Warrior. Even though I didn't play it much as a kid, it was an impactful game for me. It taught me a lot about cover mechanics at the time, where I was more familiar with the run and gun nature of arena shooters. To my surprise, it holds up today, yet I don't think it's for the same reasons as most other titles. Released in 2004 on the Xbox, Full Spectrum Warrior is essentially a small-scale real-time strategy game, not too dissimilar from a squad-based shooter. You control two four-man squads from a third-person view. A cursor is used to not only give orders, but also preview what formation the team will be in when they reach their destination. Keeping units in cover is basically the entire point, as two bullets can down a soldier. Unlike a squad-based shooter, controlling the action isn't entirely hands-off. Unlike a squad-based shooter, Unlike a squad-based shooter, controlling the action is entirely hands-off. Sorry, I read that wrong. You give an order, the character readies, then they act. Despite a focus on forward momentum through levels, most of the mechanics center around defensive maneuvers. Whether it be pushing up to cover, moving cautiously in pairs, laying down suppressing fire to distract foes, or simply having a squad watch a sector. It's all about situational awareness and exploiting the enemy's flanks. Most of the challenge comes from implementing these simple commands in increasingly complex encounters, as well as having each squad support each other. For being a fairly low profile strategy game on a console in 2004, it works surprisingly well. While technically considered an RTS, it's built entirely around playing on a controller. Most actions are as simple as pointing a team in a direction, then pressing a button. There's also some branching inputs where you instead hold a button for a different command There are also some branching inputs where you instead hold a button for a different command. It's intuitive, just not a common sense control scheme. However, with an hour-long required tutorial, you're force-fed these instructions whether you like it or not. That's not to say everything is great. Frequently, when trying to move units a couple of feet, the cursor won't be visible off the bottom of the screen. Also, since the view is locked at an angle above the squad's head, it can be difficult to move long distances around corners. Beyond the soldier's views, there's not much feedback. While generous with checkpoints, unresponsive soldiers quickly lead to death. Certain actions, such as staying in formation, seem to have higher priority than, say, dodging a grenade. Aside from a sequel in 2006, as well as a similar-looking PSP game called SOCOM US Navy SEALs Tactical Strike, I haven't been able to find much else that really attempts to create that same experience as Full Spectrum Warrior. It makes me wonder if the reason why it feels so playable today is due to the lack of a modern equivalent. When it comes to 3D home consoles, the first decade or so can be difficult to return to. Developers essentially had to refigure out game design as they transition transitioned from 2D to 3D, which resulted in a lot of titles with drastically different solutions to the same problems. The most popular mechanics were iterated on and developed into what they are today. After playing a genre with those accumulated improvements, it can be hard to go back 10 to 20 years to a game that structured itself in a completely different way. At the same time, if it's of the structure that's been evolving for decades, it can be challenging to return to a genre that has seen massive improvements. Full Spectrum Warrior falls into a special place. Very little has been done in the realm of consoles RTSs. Because of that, there's no real bar to compare it to. No one built off these mechanics, but at the same time, there's no different standard for what it should be. Without that context, it remains as it was, a unique twist on the RTS genre made for a console's controller. So I didn't really chime in at all during this because I think maybe my problem with this article might be a little more complicated. I think there's a flow problem with this article when it comes to explaining the game up front and then kind of getting into, you know, what the point of the article is. I think I needed to be more upfront with exactly what the point I was trying to make was, because I kind of just mentioned, hey, I played this when I was a kid and I'm surprised it holds up, but for different reasons than I expected. I kind of want a bit more details on exactly what that is, or some more specifics, I think, before I get into the article, especially since this is one of those cases where you have to explain the game first and foremost, and this is a hard thing to do, honestly. Like one of the most challenging things I find is when you're playing a game, or when you're trying to talk about a game, and you have to spend so much time on fine details just to get to the point that you can talk about what you like about it, a game. And because people, you know, are likely to stop reading something earlier on or stop watching something earlier on, I think it's a very difficult challenge to tease what people are getting into without them really knowing what the heck you are even talking about in the first place. So it's a hard balance to find, and I can see why I was unable to do it here. But I think overall this is still a good. I think the idea behind this article is still good, but maybe the way as which it was written is a little lacking. Now I will say I think this was at the time when I was trying to put out an article per week, so chances are I did not spend a ton of time on this article, unfortunately. But you know, still, I think it's still a solid read, and I'm a big fan of Full Spectrum Warrior. I would love to do something on Full Spectrum Warrior for the YouTube channel at some point. Like I mentioned in the article, there's a sequel that came out in 2006, as well as a PSP SOCOM game that tried to duplicate this kind of formula with Tactical Strike. So I would like to play those some days. I just don't know when that will happen. But I think it would make sense at some point to kind of put together a video around this particular type of game. I think the one issue I might run into is because I'm not particularly familiar with like PC RTSs and things like that. You know, I see this game as somewhat unique because I've never seen anything else like it, and it feels built for console, but I would not be surprised if somebody kind of like came out of nowhere and was like, hey buddy, some PC game does this kind of thing already. So that's just due to my lack of a lot of knowledge of that like PC RTS space. So I feel like I would probably need to run it by a few people before I actually decided to do something in addition. But unfortunately, this kind of like military shooter thing is just a hard thing to really sell to my audience, which is pretty much, you know, mostly into, I think, two things: cool Wii games and Japanese imports. That, or at least that's kind of the two focuses I've had in recent years. So trying to make a video about Full Spectrum Warrior would be, I think, a challenge for like making it appealing to people I talk to at this point. But still, awesome game. I think if you are like into the channel for the reasons that I make the channel, which is just like, hey, really interesting video games, Full Spectrum Warrior 100% falls within that. So anyways, thank you again for coming and listening to me ramble off this article that I wrote in 2018. You know, it's still like at this point like 3+ years ago, so it's been a while. And I can definitely tell where I feel like I've improved since then, which is always a good thing. There is something nice about looking back at old articles when they are like good and be like, oh, I actually wrote something decent. But if that's how you feel about all your articles, I feel like to some degree that means you haven't improved at all. But you know, it's just how that is. So. But anyways, thank you guys for coming. Thanks for joining the Patreon if you're listening to this, although this one might be one of the free ones. I'll probably be one of the free ones. So if you have not joined the Patreon yet, please do so. You'll get more of these throughout the year. I'm going to try to continue to do these somewhat frequently because I want to use my backlog as much as possible to kind of, more easily make content. And if you have any suggestions or recommendations of how you want these handled, let me know. I'd be happy to do that as well. Anyways, thanks so much for coming. Have a great week. Bye.